Kevin Haggerty with J. Davidson Frame, discussing Dr. Frame's thought-provoking book, Framing Decisions, Decision-Making that Accounts for Irrationality, People, and Constraints. Now, David, Chapter 8, The Biology of Decision-Making, deals specifically with the human brain, which can get pretty complicated pretty quickly. Just to keep it simple, could you share with us some basic facts about the human brain, especially those that are pertinent to decision making?
Sure, I'll do that. I think it's wise when discussing this chapter to keep things really as simple as possible. Although I want to point out in the book itself that chapter is not a difficult chapter, but it's long and it's dealing with a lot of topics, and we can't cover all the details in a short presentation like this. So I think you're smart. Let's just focus quickly on some brain basics. Okay. One interesting basic, which doesn't have anything to do with decision-making per se, but it's interesting, is that our brains, okay, in your head there, your brain weighs somewhere about 3 pounds. So that's interesting. You've got 3 pounds of astonishing data processing capability. Another interesting fact that bears on this one actually bears on decision-making is that 3-pound organ has about 100 billion neurons. Each of those neurons has about 10,000 connections to other neurons. So if you work out the arithmetic and take a look at how many neuronal pathways that exist in the brain, we're talking about trillions of neuronal pathways. Okay. Another interesting fact that has a very big impact on decision making is that the brain operates on only 10 watts of power. 10 watts is the power that back in the old days of incandescent light bulbs, that was about the dimmest bulb you could get. Okay, so your brain operates at the capacity of the dimmest of the dim bulbs. Okay, there's not a lot of energy. And in a little while, if you want, we can discuss what impact this has on decision making, because it has big impacts. And then finally, the brain, as a data processing machine, processes data at 11.2 million bits per second. Now, 99.999% of that data processing is background processing. It's processing our visual information. It's processing data to keep the autonomic response system going, your heartbeat, your breathing, those kinds of things. Processing sound data and so forth. Only 45 bits per second is dedicated to conscious thought and perceptions tied to conscious thought. So just think about that. Only 45 bits per second, that's a really small amount, is dedicated to conscious thinking, okay? And 11.2 million bits per second is running in the background. Now, let me just stop at this point. Again, there's so much more information, interesting facts about the brain, but I think those are the key facts that I try to emphasize in the chapter 8.
Well, when you share that kind of data, it really is incredible, and the brain is astonishing. It's a very impressive organ, yet in Chapter 8 of the book, I see the brain referred to as a lazy organ, which surprises me. Even when I'm asleep, I'm told my brain is still active. So how is the human brain a lazy organ?
Well, it ties back to the fact that you're operating with 10 watts of power. So the brain, you're surrounded. I mean, just take a look around you, and you're surrounded with all these stimuli coming from around you. You have the sky, there's a sound you hear, there's an insect walking over in the corner of the room, and so forth. You have all this data, all these stimuli, and your brain it just isn't going to spend a lot of time and energy examining all the data that it encounters. So it's got to cut corners. And one way it cuts corners is it operates from templates. So when you have an experience, that experience is stored as a template. And then when you have a similar experience sometime in the future, okay, the brain will call up that template. And whatever data processing you carried out to understand the experience the first time, it's going to carry over to the second experience. If your second experience has some fine details that are different from the first experience, the brain may or may not accommodate those. Okay, it may be too lazy to even, it'll basically use your original experience and say, that's good enough for me. Because every time the brain goes and analyzes a new situation, it's burning a lot of calories. And it just doesn't have that many calories to burn. So templates, the use of templates, that's an example of the shortcuts that lead us to believe the brain is a lazy organ. Another feature of the lazy organ is that in order to save this energy and not process so much, the brain is constantly resisting change. The brain doesn't want to be innovative. Okay, all of us are born, have hardwired into our brains conservative tendencies. It's amazing that anybody's innovative. It's amazing anyone has a new thought, because they've got to overcome the brain's conservative tendency to have a new thought. Because every time you have a new thought, you're burning lots of calories. You're using up a lot of your 10 watts of power. And finally, the brain is basically summarizing. When it's observing things around you, it's sort of looking at it in a sketchy fashion, and then it's filling in the blanks. And that's called predictive coding. Okay, based on previous experience, some of the templates and all these things, the brain is constantly filling in the blanks, predictive coding, and it does that to save energy. Okay, and we have evidence of the predictive coding. Everyone who's watching this video clip has their own personal experience, because we see this all the time when you look at what people call optical illusions or visual illusions. Take a look at some of your favorite visual illusions, and I bet you that the majority of them, what makes the illusion an illusion is that the actual object, if you study it, that triggers the visual illusion is just is sort of a framework, and then the brain fills in the blanks. The brain is doing predictive coding, filling in the blanks, leading to an illusion of what we think is there but isn't really there.
Okay, a final question. Chapter 8 also dedicates attention to new insights on how the brain develops physically. And these insights are very different from what we thought we knew even 10 or 15 years ago. Could you elaborate on those new insights?
Sure. Very different. Our understanding of how the brain works today is dramatically different from what we thought as recently as 10, 15 years ago. And what's helped us to have better insights are some of the emerging imaging technologies. But back in the old days, 10, 15 years ago, we knew from actually tracking people's brain size. When someone dies, at the age of 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10, anatomists take out the brain, they weigh it. So we know that the brain grows very, very rapidly from the time you're in the womb until you're in your early adolescent phase or middle adolescence phases. Okay, for example, 80% of your brain mass develops in your first 2 years. So the 2-year-old has developed 80% of his or her brain mass. And so we've always believed that because in tracking the growth of the brain, we see that the brain stops growing, the brain mass itself stops growing somewhere when you're 12, 13 years old or whatever. So the belief has always been that the brain, what you get at the age of 11 or 12 or whatever in your adolescence, what you get at that stage is what you're going to live with for the rest of your life. Okay, the new imaging technology shows us, has developed, provided us with some incredible insights. One is that even as the brain mass is growing, at a certain point in your early mid-adolescence, there's a major pruning of the gray matter, okay, of the neurons. There's a major cutback. And this pruning is very similar to the pruning you experience when you prune a rose bush. Through the pruning, the brain gets rid of unused or underutilized neurons, enabling those neurons that are used, okay, that have already been exercised to strengthen. What we've also seen is that about that same time, the brain starts coating the neurons with a white substance called myelin. Okay, and overall it's called white matter. Okay, the overall term we use is white matter. So from the time you're in your early mid-adolescent period, this fatty sheath, this white fatty sheath, coats each of your neurons, enabling your neurons to operate at efficiency levels that are up to 100 times greater than the pure neuron by itself. So this white matter continues growing up until you're in your mid-20s or so. So you're actually getting smarter and more capable of processing data up until your mid-20s. Furthermore, the actual physical structure of the brain isn't complete until you're in your early to mid-20s. And the last portion of the forebrain to actually be developed in people is that portion that that strengthens our capacity for judgment and decision making. So the very last part of your brain to physically develop, when you look at the anatomy of the brain, okay, is that portion that makes us better at decision making. So if you think about the evolution of the brain in each of us, how it's growing in its maturation, you can see that we don't become fully mature decision makers until we're in our mid-20s. Okay, so our decision-making maturity, sure, part of it's based on developing experience from the time we're born, but a large part of our maturity, and an enormously large and underappreciated part, is tied to the fact that our brains don't fully mature decision-making capabilities, okay, don't enable them to become mature until we're in our mid-20s.
Thank you very much.
Sure.